Hey guys, my name is Nabil Ahmed. As you guys know, I am the co-founder and CEO of Phantom Foods. At Phantom Foods, what we do is we bring and are trying to revitalize and evolve the way that private dining is experienced by enabling chefs, mixologists, and local venues to all chip in and create these experiences. But before we can even do that, we started this podcast series to really highlight the people in the industry, understand their stories, where they've been, and where they're going. And today we've been honored with the presence of Petra. And I always like saying this, nobody wants to hear me talk. Why don't you kind of kick in, Petra, and give yourself an introduction that I would only butcher? So go for it.
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talk about our industry with you. We have a lot of fun in our industry, and it's obviously something that I love. It's a business that I'm in, so I'm really happy to be here. So I co-founded the Caviar Company with my sister Saskia back in 2015. We actually started right out of the back of out of our apartment. We're completely self-funded. We've bootstrapped our entire business up until this point. And so we kind of have a really funny story of starting with my now husband, then boyfriend, helping bring up huge, true under counter refrigerators up narrow stairs in a San Francisco apartment. And just starting, from there to then moving into the back of a law office, which was also very random, to
Mhm,
then moving just down the street from you to our retail store in San Francisco.
mhm,
So in 2017, we opened up our retail store, like a caviar retail shop, right in the heart of Cow Hollow on Union Street. And now we have also a caviar and champagne tasting room in Tiburon. So a lot has happened in this past, gosh, what is that? 6 years now?
yeah.
Yeah. So
We don't count the last 2 years because they were a blur,
I know,
right?
no kidding. It's after that, it's just crazy. But yeah, we've been really busy, and we're constantly evolving and growing and figuring out how we can change and better our product, better our pricing, our quality, and things like that.
Yeah, I always ask this question because it always interests me. Like, where did it all start? Like, I went to school as an engineer. I don't touch that at all. Absolutely. So, when did you know that you kind of wanted to get into this?
So I went to school for speech language and hearing sciences, and I thought I was going to either be a speech pathologist working with students in a school, or be an audiologist and be fitting hearing aids.
Hmm.
But I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, and I went to Texas Tech, which is in Lubbock. And
Hmm.
so by my senior year, I was really finally motivated to leave home, finally brave enough to leave home. And so thankfully, I was very lucky at that time I had an aunt who was living in Carmel, and she's like, "Well, come out to California. You'll love it. Let me reach out to my friends and see if I can help get you a summer internship. And then you can, decide what you want to do from there." And so it's really all due to my aunt that got me out here and got me this internship working for Coastal Luxury Management. And they're the
Hmm.
company they're the minds behind Pebble Beach Food and Wine and LA Food and Wine.
Oh, wow.
So, growing up in West Texas, it's very safe to say that I had never had caviar, nor ever having any real fresh produce. We're
Hmm.
a big agriculture area, but more for cotton and things like that.
Yeah.
And I came out to California, and she took me to the farmers market one time, and I saw what fruits and vegetables were supposed to look like. Like these
Hmm.
vibrant, bright colors, and you just like, oh my gosh, that actually just looks delicious. That tomato is so red. I just want to bite. Like, that looks amazing, and it really opened up my mind to food. And
Hmm.
and then on top of that, working for this internship where my main project was helping with LA Food and Wine. And so I got to go down to LA for a few weeks and really help execute the event. And I got to understand the life of the culinary industry, of these chefs who work so hard for bites that can be gone like that, right?
Yeah.
You think about the amount of time that it takes to think about a dish, compose it, source for it, put it all together to where it works, and then you think about the amount of time that takes to eat it. Is It blows me away all the time, and it really gave me such a respect and admiration for chefs to be like, this industry is really cool. Like, they work really hard. Don't get me wrong, it's a tough industry with long hours, standing up all day, but the passion is there. Like, it's a passion driven industry. And also, it's a playful industry still, though, right? Like, hospitality people, we take care of each other. Like, if people in hospitality that are in restaurants come into our store and just are buying caviar for themselves, we're like, oh, industry discount, we know you deserve that.
Yeah.
And
No, that's the one thing I do love, just to kind of pick on that point, is the fact that you understand the amount of work that it gets to, let's say, getting that single piece out to a consumer, and then it's gone just like that.
right.
And there are a lot of factors that could go into play to make that consumer unhappy, or happy. Usually when they're happy, it's because of the food. If they're unhappy, it's typically something pissed them off that day, or something happened. So it's really, the industry is really difficult because it's a lot of work. And you said this so perfectly. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of standing on your feet. It's a lot of preparation. And it's this symphony that kind of happens all for this one second, right? Or a few seconds.
Right.
And that's really cool that that kind of inspired you to kind of get in there. And then going from Texas to Carmel to LA and back and forth, that, you're living the California dream, I'd tell you that.
I know. I got full exposure. My mind and my heart just like were opened, to
Hmm.
see this, to see, like, again, the different atmospheres, the different industry, and my love for what people are doing. And again, like you were saying, if someone's coming in and having a bad day, like, chefs are preparing for anything, right? They're creating a place for people just to come in and have dinner, for nourishment, for celebration, for mourning, for, if they just need to treat themselves, and they're
Hmm.
covering everything. But yeah, so I feel very, very lucky with the chain of events that obviously led me to moving to San Francisco and getting my first job in the caviar industry.
Hmm. So that first job, was it you kicking off your company straight, or was it working for? Is it the same kind of food and wine um, institution that you were working for?
I was working for a caviar company,
Oh,
and
okay.
I just needed a job. I moved out to San Francisco. I had never been to San Francisco, but my sister Saskia, who I started the company with, she's my big sister, and I trust her with anything. So
Yeah.
even with food, I used to be an extremely picky eater, and I would always ask Saskia, like, "Do you think I'll like it?" And if it had her stamp of approval, I knew I would like it. And in my mindset, I would like it because Saskia said I would like it, right?
Yeah, I
And
love that.
so she visited San Francisco a lot after college years for her. And she said, one day I'm going to live there. And so I knew if Saskia liked it, I would like it too. And so I called her one day and said, "Hey, I'm moving to San Francisco. I'm not coming back to Texas. Do you want to do this together?" And that day she quit her job working at a CPA firm in Fort Worth,
Hmm.
and she got ready to move. And so we moved out together with our two Bernese Mountain dogs. So
Oh,
you
wow.
can
Those are
imagine,
apartment dogs.
yeah, right. Getting this apartment
Yeah.
in San Francisco and being, oh, and by the way, we have two Bernese Mountain Dogs. Like, I tried to
Yeah.
say it after the fact, under my breath, as really fast as
Mhm.
I could to try to
Yeah.
get, and we got our apartment. It was kind of another serendipitous situation, running into this guy on the street who happened to be getting rid of his apartment. Um, but we came out here without jobs. And so
Mhm.
she obviously she's brilliant, and she got a kind of a finance job right away, and I got this through my connections with LA Food and Wine, got this caviar job. And it was a real entry level position that I started at, kind of more administrative assistant
Hmm.
position. But, I really got sucked into it. And I was just fascinated by the different varieties of caviar, the history of caviar, where it was coming from and how it was farmed. And I think what really pulled me in was like the science behind caviar. And
Hmm.
that's where I can tie, like, that's was my passion behind speech language and hearing. Like, I loved audiology and I loved the physiology of what affects our hearing and things like that, just like what affects fish and fish farming and the outcome in order to get great caviar. So I was like fully sucked in right away.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about your story is you called it an entry level job. I think it's probably still a lot of work, but it's kind of beautiful to see that you started from entry level. Now you are the president and founder of a caviar company. And a lot of these amazing stories, even in the service industry, like, these Michelin star chefs that I've been talking to, or owner and operators of restaurants like the Shuckery and Petaluma. I was talking to Jazz before. Everybody started off like entry, like, hey, I got in here. I was just testing my feet out, and I got inspired, and I kept going and I kept going and I kept going, and then it got to that certain point. So what's really cool is moving to San Francisco with no job, picking a job through a connection that you got. But again, that's how the world works. And then having this story kind of evolves to where you are today, right? It just shows me that your future is even, 10x bigger than what we can imagine right now. I'm predicting it right now. I said
I
it
hope
right here.
so.
Yeah. But then, so you're in, you were you kind of an admin assistant when you get into this company in caviar. Did they just kind of start testing caviar with you and you're like, I'm in?
Well, I was also like an assistant to my executive assistant to my boss too. So I was
Mm.
following her around doing whatever she needed me to do, running errands or assisting, like following her on tastings or events and things like that. And I mean, I love to tell my team now during the holidays, we like build so many boxes. And I come downstairs now when we're doing shipping because I'm not too involved in shipping anymore. And I'm like, I will race you to see how many boxes I can build right now. Like, I can
Yeah.
remember after a holiday season having like band-aids on every finger, just from doing the tape gun and like wearing out that skin so much. So yeah, like you were saying, it is kind of fun to see the full circle from but I'm not like, I'll still happily build boxes today. I love to spend time with my team. We have a pretty cool team on board right now. So anything to spend some extra time with them, I'm down to do it.
Yeah. So you talked about the science. So I'm the dumb one in the room, right? I've tasted probably caviar a year ago for the first time, and I know that's probably something I shouldn't be telling people, but it's true, right? It's
No,
like,
that's
hey,
okay.
I was one of those people who are like, hey, look, what is that? Like, I've heard a lot about it. Should I have it? Should I not? And then I tasted it, and it was amazing. One of our chefs, he's the executive chef of Pabu Izakaya in San Francisco.
Yeah.
He made this like creme fraiche with some caviar on top on this little crisp, and it was probably the best thing. Like, the first one was the one I'll never forget. Um, but tell me a little bit more about the science of caviar that really kind of got you into getting attached to it.
Yeah, well, it's such a special fish. It's this prehistoric endangered species that's been around for millions of years. And whenever you look at them, they do look prehistoric. They do kind of look like dinosaurs. And so something that's really cool about sturgeon is they're considered a fin fish as opposed to scale fish. And that's a
Mhm.
big thing of where caviar comes from, right? So it has to specifically come from sturgeon. It's not considered caviar. It's coming if it's roe coming from salmon or from trout, and then I love that the history of caviar. I think is really fascinating too because it hasn't always been this really high end special food. It used to be, coming up on, actually, we're coming up on the time now, like on Lent. And during the Lent, the Russian Orthodox Church said that it was okay to eat sturgeon because they didn't have scales. And
Oh,
so,
interesting.
people who could afford it would actually eat the meat and they would throw out the roe. And so people who couldn't afford the meat would then eat the roe to, help nourish themselves during Lent. And it's kind of a similar story to lobster, how lobster was fed to prisoners at one point, and now it's this
Hmm.
really, really decadent and special food. But so that has always fascinated me too, like how it's made full circle. And it wasn't really until the Mongols are the ones who really built it up and made it this special food. And then the czars in Russia took that over, trying to impress the Mongols when they were visiting and have like the best caviar to show.
Oh, wow. So it's like this is just shows you the history of caviar as it's kind of gone through centuries, right? So
Right.
every, let's say, dominant power in the world was has onboarded caviar as a way to have a conversation in that transition period, but then it just kind of keeps getting handed down, and that's how we see an evolution of what's happened.
Yeah, yeah, and not to digress from the science, but when you're talking about the science of the sturgeon, so there are about 20, I believe, 27 different species of sturgeon in the world, and
Hmm.
actually, they're only native to the northern hemisphere, which is really interesting because there are two farms that we've worked with before and can source caviar from. That one's in Madagascar and one's in Uruguay, but that's kind of, I don't want to you know derail us too much
Yeah.
there, but with these different species of sturgeon, the characteristics are super different from each other. Because you take like a hackleback, for example, which is one of our really popular products. It's one of the last wild caviars available nowadays. Pretty much everything has to be farmed, but the
Hmm.
reason why this can still be wild is they spawn really young and they live in like warmer waters, and that's why they can produce eggs at a younger age. And that fish is maybe about 18 inches before being producing eggs, whereas like a white sturgeon from that's native to the San Francisco Bay, sometimes we don't get eggs from them until they're 6 to 8 years old, and then they're about
Oh, wow.
250 pounds whenever we get the eggs from them, and then they yield 20% of their body weight in caviar.
Oh, wow.
But there, if you were to taste a white sturgeon caviar next to a hackleback caviar, they're totally different. The size of the eggs is different, the color of the eggs is different, and the flavor profile is super different. And I think that's what's really exciting. It's like if you taste different, different wine, and different grapes yield different characteristics.
Yeah.
It's if you can relate it to wine or cheese, then I think it makes it a lot more approachable, and it makes it easier to educate yourself and ingest that, or take in that knowledge. And
Yeah, I guess they are effects of the ecosystems that they're currently in, right? So if you're talking
totally.
about different regions, different waters, what is around them, like what are they consuming to where they can change the taste of it. And then you said it was a Heckleback. It was that the wild is that's the wild caviar.
Yes.
So how I was reading a few things, right? So how is that wild versus sustainable? Or can they be both sustainable, both wild and sustainable? Like, is this? I know there's a conversation around caviar where you know is it good or is it bad? Like that's what I'm trying to understand a little more, and maybe I can get some information from you on that one.
Right, absolutely. So with the hackleback, what's great is that the stocks are healthy and they're plentiful, and there's no immediate risk to that species. So for
Hmm.
that, I don't have guilt or worry about taking from the wild. However, we monitor it. If anything changes, we would happily take it off of our menu and not offer
Hmm.
it, because we don't want to be responsible for hurting the sturgeon species. And then for me, sustainable caviar is more like the white sturgeon, for example. But then um, and where nothing is taken from the wild. So, for example, the farm we work with and that I used to work for, they have their own brood stock. So basically, every year they do the spawning, and they have these females that they know produce great eggs that will then go on to be sturgeon, that will then go on to either make great sturgeon meat or make great caviar or both. And so every year they take the eggs through C-section from the females, and then they fertilize the eggs with the sperm from the males on the farm. And
Mhm.
then I've done this myself actually, and you're just like in there mixing it up basically in a big stainless steel mixing bowl, you
Wow.
know,
Yeah.
fertilizing the eggs, and then you put them in this big incubator, basically, where this water is filtering through, and it's making sure the water is all clean. And then after 7 days, the eggs hatch. Little fingerlings, or they're like tadpoles, basically, swim up, and then they go into their tank, and that's where the story begins.
Oh, wow.
Some caviar producers don't have their own brood stock, or they don't actually raise fish in house themselves. So there are places like all around Sacramento where you can actually purchase mature sturgeon and then process it yourself and get it onto the market yourself, which is fine. It's important a message of the story that consumers need to know. So as long as you're being clear with consumers about kind of the history of the fish and not saying that it was farm raised in your own farm. So then there's a big I think there's a big difference of, you know, raising the caviar in house. You know their diet, you know their full history, you know what tanks they're coming from before they're processed. But again, like, I think it's fine if other purveyors, you know, not everyone has access to be able to raise
Hmm.
their own sturgeon in house and take care of that, all of those steps. But what's important is to relay that message, you know. And so we prefer, whenever we're sourcing from different farms, we prefer to work with farms that everything's done in house, and it's that full cycle of doing the spawning, raising the fish, and processing the caviar all under one roof, as opposed to outsourcing mature sturgeon, then harvesting them on site, and then redistributing to
Yeah. How
distributors or
is so?
consumers.
What I love about what you do is you really care about the sourcing of where it comes from. So it's like I need to understand what I'm purchasing, number one, and what I'm selling to my customers. And it's important to have that core, let's say, vision, but like that core principle in your business and as yourself. How is the rest of the industry when you look at it? Like, is it are their practices, you know, hidden? Are they veiled? Are they okay with what they do? Is it mostly geared towards sustainable farming, or is it still, you know, bits and pieces here where if you could try to fix it, you would?
You know, I think the biggest thing is mislabeling. Most, I would say most caviar companies do get farmed
Hmm.
caviar. So that's a
Check.
win, right?
Yeah.
You can check that off at least. But there's a lot of mislabeling or misinformation behind where the caviar is coming from. And that's really important because it matters, you know, like certain caviar has certain characteristics. And that's what we're trying to educate people on. Like, if you want something that's a smaller egg, that jet black egg that I was talking about with the hackleback, you specifically need hackleback. If you want something that's creamier and more buttery, that's your white sturgeon, you know. But we've seen and how are you supposed to know? Like, sometimes we see jars
Hmm.
that just say caviar on it. It doesn't disclose anything about the species. It doesn't disclose where it's coming from. It just says caviar. So you're hoping, you know, that it's likely fish eggs in there. You don't know if it's coming from sturgeon or not. You don't know if it's, and the value and the price of coming from sturgeon versus like other fish roe is
Hmm.
significantly different. So, and we see a lot in our industry, and like on the commercial market, it's actually pretty insane what we see. And we've seen things coming, you know, a lot of people, a lot of caviar is coming from China. Like 80% of the
Oh,
world's
wow.
caviar is coming from China. And it's great, great caviar. You know, there are some really reputable farms over there. And that's fine. Like, we
Hmm.
get caviar from China, you know, and our chefs are happy with it, our consumers are happy with it, but we let them know that it's coming from China just in case people have issues. Just like we let them know our white sturgeon's coming from California, our Siberian sturgeon is coming from Poland, or like right now our trout has changed. Sometimes it comes from Denmark, sometimes it comes from Spain. And we're
Hmm.
about to get some from Japan, and that's all great as long as the quality is there. It's a safe product, a clean product, but it needs to be disclosed because people need to know where
Yeah,
their
I
food's
almost
coming
feel like
from.
we're in this transformation, and maybe you can educate me on, because I'm still new to this realm of food, right? In this industry, but you know, a lot more consumers, in my opinion, are trying to understand where the ingredients come from, right? Even down to like, let's talk about the plant-based like movement that we're seeing here, right? Like plant-based meat, like plant-based lamb, plant-based chicken, these replacements, they're almost creating a brand for themselves that is attached on the menu item, right? So it's like, hey, I don't, I want to understand what my plant-based food is. So like, I want Impossible meat in my burger. And I remember when, Umami came out with an Impossible burger, and everyone's like, let's try it, right? And I hope I got that right. Maybe it was Beyond. Who knows, right? But where I'm seeing this, and what I'm kind of hearing here with caviar is like, if you're gonna have caviar on the menu, or you're gonna consume caviar, you kind of want to understand where it was sourced. And I almost feel like we're the right move for this industry, as we're getting more conscious consumers, is to identify the sourcing of how it is, due to the fact that, personally for me, I rather have something that's sustainable, right? That's not, hurting the environment, that is not hurting people if they have to, uh, depending on the pricing that they have to do, or picking it, right? And we had another conversation around cacao and how sourcing that was difficult, but we don't have to get into that one. But, I don't know if that's true, or if that's your feeling around a lot of things. Is there an education piece that needs to happen for consumers?
Absolutely. And that's where, of course, like we talk about wanting to make caviar more approachable, but these days it kind of is. That's what
Mhm.
every caviar company says, is we're the approachable caviar company. We are unveiling the caviar company and making it more of an everyday indulgence, which is great. We're on board with that too. But how are you doing that? Besides just saying, hey, we're having fun over here, we're approachable, and come play with us. It's like education, right? Drilling and educating consumers so that they know, even if they don't buy caviar from us, that they know where to go. The education is such an important aspect to it, especially caviar, because it is a niche product and people don't know what questions to ask, right? And so we really also encourage our chefs to disclose what caviar is on the menu. Because sometimes you'll go to a restaurant and get the American
Mhm.
caviar service. So American caviar. So that means it could be paddlefish, hackleback, white sturgeon. There's an Osetra that's farmed in North Carolina. So it could be anything. And so we still need to be like, no, give us more. Tell us either the species name, or tell us
Mhm.
the scientific name. So we know what to look for when
Maybe
purchasing
this is the
caviar.
education piece that's transforming, because when you look at steak, you always want to know what your cut is, right? And maybe this black veil behind the food industry is kind of slowly getting moved forward. And I think it starts with you, right? Like, you're sourcing to chefs, you're sourcing to other places. It's making sure that they understand, like, hey, this is why you're purchasing X versus Y. And we want you to pass along that information moving forward. I think that's very important. That's awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree. So thank thank you. We really want, yeah, people to know what they're eating. And I think, again, saying like what kind of steak and where it's coming from and what that diet, that's exactly the same. It's kind of all around with food. People deserve to know what they're putting
I
into their
agree. And
bodies.
I think, now that we're just kind of chipping away at time here, what I always like to do is, so we already kind of mentioned the Caviar Co., and you're right around the corner on Union Street in Cow Hollow in San Francisco. But I hear that you ship internationally, or globally, or locally. Like, how do I get caviar from you. How do I get educated also on the items that you guys are supporting? Where do I go? Where do I find you? Or how do we harass you on Instagram or email? How do we get to you?
Yes, so we love to be harassed. Please, please come bring it on. So we ship all over the country, priority overnight on ice packs in packaging that would last for up to 48 hours, you know. So we say that we deliver caviar basically like on a velvet pillow to you as best as we can to keep it in the best shape possible. So you can reach out to us. You know, our website is thecaviarco.com and you can order online through there. And we actually have join our newsletter because we always have events, always have promotions. Sometimes we sell these special tasting flights where you can taste different caviars side by side. And also, you know, follow us on, excuse me, follow us on Instagram. We're just at the Caviar Co. And you can always see like the specials we have going on too. You won't miss anything if you follow us there. And you can see that's where we really, that's our platform, right? So that's where we really talk about education, different information on the product, where it's coming from, and
Well, I
what's
love
happening
that.
in
And
the
I think
industry.
what's amazing about, this entire thing is your story, right? It's like from, Texas to California to saying, hey, sis, I'm moving to San Francisco, come with me, to just moving, getting a job, and then turning into a co founder and owner of a business. It's not an easy thing. So I think a lot of kudos to you. And then taking on an industry
Thank you.
by not only sourcing and supporting great experiences, but educating people along the way. I think that's important. And I think that's a core value with what we talk about. And I hope, some of our members got a little more information today that they didn't know before. So thank you so much, Petra, for taking the time and talking through everything with me.
Yeah, excuse me. Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.